Why do we suffer? It's probably one of the oldest, most human questions there is, and for centuries, we've been searching for answers. Well, today, we're going to dig into a text that's about 2,500 years old, a text that lays out a surprisingly logical, almost mechanical answer to why we get stuck in these cycles of stress, anxiety, and just plain dissatisfaction.
So, our guide for this journey is the Sutra of the Great Noble Truths. And look, this isn't some modern self-help spin. This is a direct window into a foundational teaching of the Buddha. It's a deep dive into the nuts and bolts of the human condition. We're going straight to the source to understand the mechanics of our own minds.
And hey, if you're thinking this sounds a little heavy, you're not alone. This is a quote from Ānanda, who was one of the Buddha's closest disciples. He literally spent a night wrestling with this very idea, and even he found it profound and hard to understand. So let's kind of join him in that same investigation.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with Ānanda's late-night question. Then we'll unpack the Buddha's answer, which is this idea of an unbreakable chain of suffering. We'll look at the one link that really matters, our feelings, and see how they fuel the whole thing. Then we'll explore the wild idea of no self that comes from breaking that chain. And finally, we'll touch on a practical path to actually find some peace.
So picture this. Our story kicks off with Ānanda, all by himself, late at night, deep in meditation. And he's just trying to wrap his head around this core teaching, this law of cause and effect. Why is life so tangled? Why do things happen the way they do? He realizes he's got to go ask the one person who can lay it all out for him.
So, when Ānanda asks the Buddha, he gets a confirmation. Yup, you're right. This stuff is incredibly deep. He explains that the reason we get stuck, the reason we bounce between happiness and sadness, is that we just don't see this fundamental law of reality, this concept he calls dependent origination.
At its heart, dependent origination is actually pretty simple. The idea is that nothing, absolutely nothing, exists on its own. Everything is a result of something else. Think of it like a massive, endless line of dominoes. One falls, and it inevitably knocks over the next, and the next, and the next. The Buddha uses this exact logic to trace our suffering all the way back to its very first domino.
Now, the Buddha does something really clever here. He traces this chain backwards, starting from the very end. So we experience old age and death. Why? Well, it's simple. Because we were born. Okay, so what causes birth? It's caused by this thing called becoming, this forward momentum of existence. And what drives that momentum? Our deep instinctual habit of clinging and attachment. And what fuels our clinging? A primal, powerful force called craving.
So let's keep pulling on that thread. Where does craving come from? It pops up because of our feelings. And feelings, they arise from contact, our eyes seeing, our ears hearing. That contact depends on our six senses, which are part of our name and form. That's basically just our mind and body. And what's the spark that gives rise to a mind and body in the first place? Consciousness itself. Boom. We've traced it all the way back to the beginning.
Now this is where it gets really fascinating. The text points out this feedback loop. See, consciousness needs a mind and a body to even exist, right? But the mind and body also need consciousness to function. They completely depend on each other. They prop each other up. And according to the Buddha, it's right here, in this codependent dance, that the entire great mass of suffering gets its start.
Okay, so if our whole life is just one long, complicated chain reaction, are we just stuck? Is there any hope? Well, yes. The sutra points to one absolutely critical, vulnerable spot in the chain, the link right between feeling and craving. This right here is where we have the power to change everything.
So the text boils down every single one of our experiences into just three basic flavors of feeling: pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And our automatic knee-jerk reaction is to chase the pleasant stuff, run away from the unpleasant stuff, and pretty much ignore the neutral stuff. But here's the kicker. Every single one of those reactions, the chasing, the running, the ignoring, is an act of craving. And that is the spark that forges the very next link in the chain.
So here it is. The crucial point, the whole game changer is this. The solution isn't to try and stop feeling things. That's impossible. It's to see feelings for what they truly are. Just temporary, fleeting events. They show up, they hang out for a bit, and then they disappear. When you can really see their temporary nature, that automatic reflex to grab or push away, it just stops. You cut off the fuel supply to craving.
And breaking that one little link has a seriously mind-bending consequence.
It leads to one of the most profound and honestly most misunderstood ideas in this whole teaching, the dissolving of the self.
The Sutra has a term for this: I-sight. It's that deep gut feeling we all have that there's a permanent, solid me living inside our heads, a little CEO who's experiencing all these feelings and calling the shots. But the text argues that this is actually an illusion, a mistaken point of view. And the logic here is pretty powerful when you think about it. If feelings are just these impersonal, temporary events, like weather patterns passing through the sky, then who exactly is the permanent me that's experiencing them? When we realize there's no fixed receiver, just a flowing stream of experience, that whole idea of a separate, solid self just starts to dissolve. So what's the result of this massive realization? Complete and total freedom. This quote here describes the state of an enlightened being. It's not about being wiped out or disappearing. It's about reaching this state of profound peace where that compulsive cycle of suffering, which was being fueled by the illusion of a self, has finally ground to a halt. Now, I know this can all sound incredibly abstract and philosophical, but the really cool thing is, the sutra doesn't just drop these huge ideas on you and leave you hanging. It actually provides a practical, step-by-step training manual for your mind.
First, the text gives us a kind of map of consciousness. It lays out these different states of being, from our normal physical world all the way to these formless, subtle realms. The point isn't that you have to memorize all this, but just to know that a map like this exists to help you navigate the inner landscape of your own mind.
And then you get the training itself, the 8 liberations. You can think of it as a progressive workout for the mind. It's a path of meditation that guides you from just observing the world as it is, all the way up through those higher states of consciousness, to the final goal, the complete and total end of the cycle of suffering.
And so this 2,500-year-old text leaves us with a really modern and, honestly, an empowering question. It frames suffering not as some kind of punishment or a big mystery, but as a chain reaction of cause and effect. It's a process. And if it's a process, that means it can be understood. If it's a chain, that means it has links. And that means the power to break it, well, it lies right there in that tiny, crucial moment between what you feel and what you choose to do next.